The Biden administration is considering how to recalibrate its policy in the Middle East region in light of the ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians without distracting from other priorities. White House officials are debating how to recalibrate their approach, hoping to avoid another crisis that would further divert Mr. Biden's attention from his top foreign policy priorities. And global affairs analyst Joshua Onyenwere joins me at the news to discuss this. Good to have you join us, Joshua Onyenwere.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just look at what played out in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Palestine. People say that this has drawn attention for the urgent need for a Middle East policy or Middle East plan by the Biden administration, because it does seem that the major policy or foreign policy they have now is really about China. What do you make of that?
The policy the Biden administration has is not only for China. I mean, recently there has been some responses from the Washington towards North Korea as well. However, Biden's administration, have raised concerns about the recent attacks in Palestinian. And although it still insists that Israel has the right to defend itself, but the problem here is depending on which faction you belong to, whether you belong to those calling for an end to Israel's continuous expansion and occupation policy and continued, active military engagement with Hamas, or whether you belong to those calling for an end to the persistent killings of Palestinians and the takeover of their lands. One thing is certain, this is a controversial issue, at this time, and the death toll, continues to grow unabated. So, in summary, as regards to Biden's Middle East policy, with regards to the Israel-Palestinian issue, to summarize it, his response has been superficial.
He's been largely praised on how, by some in some quarters rather, about how he quietly addressed the Israel-Palestine conflict. But while he was making the announcement for the ceasefire, he talked about how the quiet and relentless diplomacy will continue. And there are concerns as to whether that quiet and relentless diplomacy will suffice, especially because there is a need to ensure that the hold Hamas has on Gaza is broken to an extent.
Yes, certainly. But keep in mind that Israel is the 8th biggest arms exporter in the world. And in addition to that, the United States is by far the biggest exporter of arms to Israel. So what we are witnessing is United States, there is a conflict of interest, and Biden is in a dilemma on whether to affirm his political and moral leadership and value paradigm, or continue to reaffirm United States' unwavering support for Israel, in spite of Israel's episodes of disappointment to Biden's Middle East policy. So there are critics, who are saying that Biden hasn't shown firm position on even exercise adequate pressure, on Palestinian or Israel. So what is certain is that there are underground diplomacy going on, and we expect to see the results of this diplomacy in the coming weeks. But undeniably, Biden is in a dilemma on how to proceed as regards to this recent conflict.
Let's look at the fact that this is just one issue, and that's the Israel-Palestine conflict. It is just one issue. There is the Iran nuclear deal. There is Syria. There is the UAE that is now becoming some sort of force of stability in that region. And one wonders what kind of pillars of stability that the Biden administration can build in the Middle East to ensure that there is lasting peace to an extent.
Well, it is the responsibility of those within the region to determine the kind of peace that they want to experience within the region, and especially the UAE. If you look, deeply into the conflicts happening within the region, you see Israel plays a significant role either in the Iran nuclear conflict and escalation, or is it in the Saudi Arabia, tension? So Israel consistently plays a role, and the reason for that is that Israel United States has a geographic interest and influence on Israel. I mean, through Israel, the United States has a geopolitical stronghold on the region. So many political analysts will argue that it is for the region, for the countries within the region to determine what kind of peace they want to experience, and not for United States, thousands of miles away, to determine the peace within the region.
We'll see how the United States will recalibrate its policy in that regard. Global Affairs Analyst Joshua Onyenwere, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.